We are delighted once again to have Danielle DiMartino Booth, CEO and Chief Strategist at QI Research and a Fed expert to discuss the economy and Chair of Powell's big speech at Jackson Hole today. Danielle, welcome once again. Delighted to be able to get you today, just a couple of hours after the speech. And boy, with a little bit of a surprise, or maybe a little bit of surprise, because the market was clearly very, very worried that the chair would dig in his heels because he's just constantly getting berated. But I guess I'll leave it to you, but it seems like he played it straight. He played it the way he was supposed to play it.
He did. And Ty, as you know, I've been very critical of Powell not being data dependent for months and months and months now. We've seen the trend in the revisions. We've seen the momentum in the revisions. We've known that 24 of the 30 months ended June were revised down, and that therefore, that Chair Powell shouldn't be behaving as if the labor market had not already turned, and that therefore he was not easing in order to be spiteful to the president, which made him just as political as President Trump has been towards him, and shirking his duties as chair of the Fed to make monetary policy for the public good. It looks like he did not want for the legacy of his speeches at Jackson Hole, and he brought up the name of his idol, Paul Volcker. It seems like he wanted to respect the independence, not just of the Federal Reserve as an institution, but of monetary policy making. And therefore, he went back. He went back to the roots. He went back to where he was supposed to be. He knew the audience was going to be extremely friendly, and it was. And he said what needed to be said. He said it out loud, and he started with numbers. So it was refreshing.
He basically said, the facts have changed, so I'm going to change my opinions. How about you? I think that's a famous line from somebody whose name escapes me at the moment. But he really, I thought, he's had his, sort of road bumps, but I think he's been an honest and very straightforward and plain spoken Fed chair, and has done perhaps the very best that he can. I'm glad he did that, because certainly that that last report, that last employment report, was quite shocking. Did it? I think even Anna Wong from Bloomberg, their economist, who is pretty good, she did mention that those revisions, especially having to do with some of the states, which should not have been that, like the government, the government and the local revision shouldn't have been revised that much. When you looked at it, when your team looked at it, did those revisions, they seem a little bit off, because they were drastic?
So actually, Ty, Anna and I are good friends, and we've spoken about this subject in September, I want to say, of 2023. It was August or September. There was a payroll report that came out, and it actually had large upward revisions to the payrolls data that were in fact larger than the downward revisions to the private sector. So it was like a plus 130,000 government jobs, negative 12,000 private sector, such that the negative revision string, which did start in 2023, was technically broken, but just by virtue of these government jobs. And the government jobs are not, the numbers are given directly to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. There's no survey response rate. And it seemed a bit shady at the time, and I called it out, because at the time the layoffs were just coming hard and fast. And indeed, the negative revision string held in the private sector. The reason I bring that up is because more than half of the revisions that had a negative sign in front of them, more than half of the 258,000 negative revisions to May and June of 2025 came from that same government sector. And it's one thing if I say, gee, it raised my eyebrow. It's another thing if Anna Wong is agreeing with me, because she's much more conservative in her approach to economics because of who she works for. I think she would agree with me. But but it's something that's been on my radar for some time now, and it seemed to me to be altogether too convenient.
So, I mean, I guess that there's a new person heading it up. Probably a month is too soon to make any real substantive changes. But it'll be interesting to see. I guess that a lot of eyes will be on the next employment report. So, do you think that the methodology could be improved? Or last month that you said you raises your eyebrows, like did you think something was off, or was just one of those happenstance things that what cost the head of BLS her job?
Well, okay, listen, I just said that in 2023, the revisions and the methodology and the birth death adjustment, that they had certainly already become very suspect to me. This predates the commissioner who was fired. But the fact is, the things, the elements of the modeling at the Bureau of Labor Statistics have still not been addressed. She didn't address them. They needed to be addressed. Somebody needs to do something. We are in an era of big data, artificial intelligence. There's no way you can tell me that once an employee identification number is created, that there can't be some government button somewhere that says, if you want to maintain your tax status, on the 31st of every month or the 30th on the last day of any month, you need to let us know what your head count is. And if you don't, you're going to lose your tax status.
That'll do it.
Just let us know once a month what your head count is, and we'll feed that into a great big huge server, and it will spit out a number that is reliable and credible as opposed to imputed. Because right now, that's the data that we get on a quarterly basis. We just get it on a quarterly basis with this massive lag time. But I would argue that there is a way with technology, Ty, to make this much more expeditious and efficient.
That makes a lot of sense. Just log on at 11 p.m. whenever it is, and then you can just say this is my head count, and that makes a lot of sense. Now, those final quarterly numbers, the lag time is something like 9 months or before you get the final numbers.
Oh, it's crazy. I mean, look, we're geeky, dismal scientists like me, we're like, ooh, we're getting into September now. We're getting really close to the fourth quarter revision for 2024. It's coming down the pipeline. I mean, for us, it's like non-farm payroll Friday in the excitement that's generated once a month. But, it's a long time before you can get excited because it's September and you're talking about December of 2024 before you finally get begin to get the actual numbers from 12 million U.S. employers.
Right, that are reliable. So we have one more employment report. We have PCE next Friday, I think, and we have one more CPI and PPI. It seems like he's, the express lanes are open to a cut in a 25 basis point cut in September. Do you think anything could, shift that to either 50 or actually shift that back towards, maybe this is just a line meeting and we're not really sure? We have 3 inflation reports. The PPI was a little bit of a shocker. Do you see us deviating from that path that he seems to have set us on now?
So I don't think that the PCE report is going to necessarily derail the Fed's plans, because when you take the CPI, the PPI, and the import price and export price data, you put them all together, there's a formula where you can spit out a really close estimate of what the PCE and the core PCE is going to be. And, Powell's no dummy. He has experience with financial markets. He knows that portfolio management fees, which were a large reason that the PPI went up, in addition to input costs being higher, but he knows that portfolio management fees that feed into the PCE are a reflection of assets under management in a stock market that is at all-time highs. So it's just a reflection of asset price inflation. So I don't think that the PCE will necessarily sway him. But let's go back to what you said about whether one individual in their post for 1 month can make a difference. Well, certainly they could. So this is going to be a test of with all deference, this is going to be a test of Donald Trump's maturity. And I don't say that lightly. If you're Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, then you want for the real employment data to get out there as quickly as possible. You want to clear the underbrush burn it down so you don't have a forest fire of historic proportions going into the midterms.
Right.
So if there's going to be bad economic news, for heaven's sakes, get it out there. But in order to do that, you have to make sure that the new commissioner, Antony, is not having the president whisper in his ear and say, give me a strong payrolls report. Because if he gets that, then you could easily see Fed policymakers say, oh, wait, May and June were just an aberration. We've gone back to a more solid path of job growth, and therefore we don't really need to, this is coming September the 5th, less than 2 weeks from today. We don't need to touch the Fed funds rate. We can hold off and continue waiting to see what the tariffs effect's going to ultimately be on inflation. So the administration can shoot itself in the foot. You can remove this rate hike from the market's calculus if you have a really strong non-farm payrolls report.
Right. It's interesting, you mentioned Antony. It appears as if some economists on the on sort of the right side of the aisle were not too big a fan of his sort of his work, and will he needs to be confirmed, right? Will he be confirmed?
Well, it's interesting. So Senator Scott is the head of the Senate Banking Committee. He put out a very positive, attaboy kind of a press release saying that he admired Antony's work and that he saw it as being very feasible, that he was going to have an expeditious confirmation process. This is when we see the ability of Trump and Bessent and Senator Thune and the head of the banking committee to see, can you get this done in 2 working weeks? Or actually a little bit less than that, because we're talking about having somebody, they come back the day after Labor Day is when the Senate comes back and reconvenes. And, in 2 weeks' time, can they confirm somebody? We'll see. Bessent thinks it can happen and it can happen quickly. And if that's the case, if Powell was hearing this through the grapevine, and in the middle of Powell's remarks, the president says, if Powell doesn't fire Governor Lisa Cook, I will. So if it looks like Antony can be confirmed quickly, and this is, Powell speaks to more people in Congress than any of his predecessors. So he's got a good feel for how quickly this confirmation process can go and how quickly he might have this individual sitting around that great big oval table. So if Powell's sitting there saying to himself, am I going to have 4, 5, 6 dissents come September? I may as well just, throw in the towel and nod to the fact that the employment picture is no longer, as I have been maintaining, solid. Right. So the makeup of the voters, of those 12 voters, makes a big difference. I conflated the BLS and the Federal Reserve, and my bad. I was actually speaking about Scott's praise for Moran's work. So just to correct myself. Yes.
No problem at all. No problem at all. But you brought up Lisa Cook, and this is sort of, you inhale and you exhale, and you're like, it seems like, fudging your mortgage application seems to be a little bit of a venal sin. But if it is true, and you're a Fed governor, is that grounds for a resignation, and if not, dismissal? It seems like you might need to hold a Fed governor to a higher bar than to a regular person who's trying to save, 100 basis points on their mortgage.
Well, it certainly would seem to be the case. It's interesting because, the minute this news broke, Bloomberg, for example, put out a story about the Philadelphia Fed and some work that it had published in 2023 that had tallied the number of fraudulent mortgages in the universe, and that even after the crisis had come and gone, that it was still 2 to 3% of mortgages, meaning, what Lisa Cook did was not unheard of. Do 2 wrongs make a right? I don't think so. But they've also had individuals like former Dallas Federal Reserve President Robert Kaplan come on TV and ask him, in that you had to step aside because of your alleged insider trading behavior, as a president of a Federal Reserve district. does that suggest that Lisa Cook should be held to a higher standard? And of course, he said, I will not comment on that. But the question does sit out there. And, the Supreme Court ruled in May that if you're confirmed by the Senate and you're sitting at the Federal Reserve, you can only be fired for cause. The best argument I've seen came out of the Wall Street Journal. They were quoting a Columbia Law School professor who was saying, well, this preceded her being confirmed by the Senate, so maybe it's not applicable. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting, but I'm not going to give my kids that train of thought.
Yeah.
Because we tell our children that the mistakes they make when they're younger travel with them for the rest of their lives.
Right. That's a not very good dodge where, this, if you said this is for cause, you don't want to see somebody lose their job and the job is important as this one, but it seems like there should be a higher standard. It's a lot of, I wouldn't say a revolving door, but certainly a lot more activity around the policymaking committee than before. But has there been, I haven't seen any news on any chatter on why Governor Kugler suddenly resigned? Is there, anything that I haven't seen? Any thoughts on what that might be?
No, in fact, when this whole Cook controversy broke, like you, I went back and I looked and I said, okay, so we're accusing the next person, but whatever, what's the explanation for somebody leaving with 5 months of their term? It absolutely made no sense to me. I can only speculate because, like you, I haven't read a single explanation. But there is something to be seen and said for the fact that Kugler was very, very left-leaning in her views. Her thesis advisor at Berkeley happens to be Mr. Janet Yellen. Of course, he doesn't go by that name, but he is Janet Yellen's husband. He's also been known to advocate for the Communist Party. And her views were always very, very much on the left. And you could certainly paint a scenario where, in theory, she was completely in disagreement with the direction policymaking was taking. She's a labor economist, and maybe she didn't want to be cast in the same die as Michelle Bowman and Christopher Waller, who were Trump appointees, and they dissented, rates not being cut. Maybe she didn't want to throw her hat in the ring with, true Republicans, but at the same time, philosophically, was very much opposed to the direction that monetary policy was taking. Again, that is pure speculation, but we do know that Kugler was a dove, and we do know that the Wall Street Journal broke with news prior to that July 30th FOMC meeting, basically broadcasting to market players that Bowman and Waller were going to dissent. So fade the news, we're letting you know in advance. And therefore, Ty, I asked the question, then why was the statement language softened?
Right.
Because the statement language is only changed in order to facilitate compromise on the committee, meaning if Kugler's not even in the room and the world knew that Bowman and Waller were going to dissent, who were the other people who would have dissented if not for the statement language being softened and nodding to a weakening economy? So you have to ask that question. And that gets us back to how quickly the Senate can confirm Kugler's replacement. And again, it gets back into the thinking of Jay Powell as he went to sleep last night. Could I have 5 or 6 dissents in September? Is that what I want my legacy to be? Or maybe I should just shoot him straight, come clean, and say job growth on a 3-month basis was running at north of 150,000. Now it's 35,000. As you said, Ty, the facts have changed.
Right. I think that's a really good point. I'm just hoping that, the former Governor Kugler wasn't terribly ill or anything like that. That's what you really.
Of course. And that's why I don't want to speculate. But she announced immediately that she was going back to her full-time post.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's good. In terms of, there's lots of speculation and, it seemed a little bit like certainly Waller was lobbying for the seat, for Powell's seat, which is a little tawdry, but hey, listen, I mean, it's a really important seat, and I think Waller's historically has been very, very solid. And I don't know who's in the lead right now. Now the betting markets seem to think it's Waller, but I wonder if the president, is going to appoint somebody. He'll give him a couple of cuts, but then is not going to be exactly what he wants, and it might be better for him because maybe you don't want a yes man at the Fed. I think certainly.
No, you don't. I mean, it is supposed to be an independent and apolitical institution. You're supposed to have nominees to sit on the Federal Reserve Board. Unlike cabinet members, there's a presupposition that you're going to have a 2/3 majority vote in the Senate because this person is going to be viewed as being apolitical and independent, which actually, as a side note, asterisk, brings us back to Lisa Cook, who her views were viewed as her views on monetary policy were viewed as being so leaning to the left that then Vice President Kamala Harris had to cast the tie-breaking vote in order to confirm her.
Wow, I forgot that. I didn't realize. I forgot that it was that close.
It was that close. Yes, indeed.
So I guess it makes sense when if Powell from Iran gets in, he could be facing 3 governor dissents or and a couple of other ones as well. That we'll give you the 25 basis points, and then every meeting thereafter is live. So he may not signal that we're in an easing cycle. It makes sense now. How many there's there after September? Is there 2 or 3 more Fed meetings this year? I can't remember.
There are 2 more that follow, and
we're going to be in December.
Okay. As we speak, there was about 2.5 rate cuts priced in through the end of the year, which means one of the 2 meetings is theoretically a jump ball. But to your point about signaling an easing cycle as opposed to just one rate cut, I think the reason that the bond market is in such a celebratory mode that is bleeding into a major stock market rally is because Chair Powell said, that the job market is behaving very strangely right now. And, from what, given historical precedent, sometimes when you're at these junctures, and there are cross currents in the data, all of a sudden you can see a shock to the unemployment rate and have it go up very rapidly. Now, I'm probably using more and different words than what he used, but that was really when the market started to rally hard. It was because Powell was opening the door to saying, we could be staring down the barrel here of a rapidly rising unemployment rate, given how the labor market is behaving. And therefore, the market said, he just said cycle.
Right. And the market loves to do that. And we just keep an eye out for, missives from Nick Timiraeus,
Exactly.
Your favorite conduit. I wonder, once Powell is gone, we'll have to find a new favorite conduit. Probably won't take us very, very long. Perhaps it will be you. And then we'll have.
I know. I am not. I am somewhat persona non grata at the Fed. I think you probably know that. Yes.
You know what? It's just because you say what you think, right? And you say it, eloquently. Is it you mentioned cross currents, and I was just. And I read the Feather every day. There's some couple of things like that PMI yesterday. It came out in the S&P. That was a little surprise on the stronger side. But if we take a step back in terms of what you're seeing, what you and your team are seeing in the economy over the past few weeks, anything that really sort of jumps out at you that you want to pay more attention to, and you suggest that market participants may want to watch that's not immediately apparent?
So we're not seeing a lot of plans to follow through in a lot of these survey data, whether you're talking about the Empire Fed, the Philly Fed came out. And when you're taking surveys and you're asking people, what do you see 6 months out? And they respond, I see us as sitting on lower inventories. That is typically not a good sign. And in fact, despite how, and there were some outlets out there like Zero Hedge who were saying, S&P Global is You know, they can't stand Trump, and therefore they're gonna paint the data to make it be more inflationary than it would be otherwise. But the one thing that did come out of that data is that the quantity of purchases in the services side of S&P Global came down for another month. And, you know, you can talk about, you know, it looks like our new orders are going to increase. It looks like our backlogs are increasing. But in the present now, you know, do as I do, not as I say, people are not buying. And in fact, S&P Global has a supply chain volatility index that they put out several days ago that we put in one of our feathers that showed that the amount of purchases in North America had dragged the entire index down because July had seen such a violent reversal of the United States buying from the global supply chain. So if you're a company right now and you're sniffing out a lack of demand going forward, then you're not going to spend your money. And it's as simple as that.
Right.
So we're following that very closely. We're also following, you know, the job market. This is a very, very, very weak job market.
Your last quick question. Your best guess, September, a one-off, or is it actually the beginning of a cycle where we could see, say, 100 basis points?
So I do see this. You know, we have seen bankruptcies continue to hit fresh record highs month in and month out. There will be fallout from this. And so I do see the continued weakening of in the corporate sector, in the credit sector, in the housing sector. I see these, and actually Powell spoke too. You know, we are seeing disinflationary impulses in the housing market, meaning that's going to be a drag on inflation. I do see this as being the beginning of an easing cycle.
Outstanding. Well, thank you so much for coming on with us today. And we will see you at the next Fed meeting, if not soon.